The autumn sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Copper Creek, as Sarah Owens clutched her crying infant to her chest, the child's wails echoing the hollow emptiness of her own stomach. 3 days without food had left her weak, her milk drying up, and her 6-month-old daughter, Emma, suffering. The merciless Wyoming territory of 1877 showed no kindness to a widow whose husband had been killed by outlaws, leaving her penniless and alone in a town that had turned its back on her. Sarah had never imagined her life would come to this. Just months ago, she had been happily married to Thomas, a shopkeeper with dreams of building a prosperous life on the frontier. Now she found herself slumped against the wall of the general store, the same establishment that had once belonged to her husband, now owned by the banker who had foreclosed on it after Thomas's death. "Move along," the new owner had told her that morning when she'd begged for credit. "Your husband's debts ain't my concern, and neither are you." Sarah rocked Emma gently, trying to soothe the infant's hunger cries with what little comfort she could provide. "Hush now, little one," she whispered, her voice cracking from thirst. "We'll find a way." But her words rang hollow. The townspeople of Copper Creek hurried past, averting their eyes from the pitiful sight. Some had been friends once, breaking bread with her and Thomas at church socials. Now they pretended not to see her, as if her misfortune might somehow be catching. The sound of approaching hoofbeats barely registered in Sarah's consciousness until a shadow fell across her face. She looked up, squinting against the setting sun to see a tall figure dismounting from a chestnut stallion. "Madam," came a deep voice, "are you all right?" Sarah couldn't find the energy to lie. "No, sir. I don't believe I am." The stranger knelt before her, and Sarah got her first clear look at him. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-weathered skin and kind eyes that seemed at odds with the gun strapped to his hip. His dark brown hair curled slightly beneath a dust-covered Stetson, and several days' worth of stubble shadowed his strong jaw. "Name's Daniel Harding," he said, his gaze moving from Sarah to the whimpering infant in her arms. "What's happened here?" "There's nothing you can do, Mr. Harding," Sarah replied, summoning what little dignity she had left. "We don't need charity." The man called Daniel gave a soft chuckle that held no mockery. "Wasn't offering charity, madam, just asking a question." Something in his direct gaze made Sarah answer honestly. "My husband was killed 3 months ago. Outlaws robbed the store and shot him when he tried to stop them. The bank took everything else." She swallowed hard. "We haven't eaten in days." Daniel Harding's eyes hardened, but not at her. He looked around at the town, at the people deliberately avoiding them, and Sarah saw a muscle working in his jaw. "And not one of these fine Christian folk offered help." Sarah looked down. "They've got their own troubles." "And you've got yours," he said firmly. He looked at the baby, whose cries had subsided into pitiful whimpers. "How old?" "6 months. Her name is Emma." Daniel nodded once, decision made. He stood and untied a bundle from his saddle. "I've got jerky and biscuits in my pack. Not much of a meal, but it'll do for now." Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. "Sir, I told you, it's not charity," he interrupted gently. "It's just one human helping another. The good Lord knows I've been hungry before." His eyes met hers as he offered a piece of dried meat and a canteen. "I heard your little one crying from down the street. She was left to starve with her baby, I thought to myself. Well, not tonight." His voice softened. "Then both will eat tonight." The simple kindness broke something in Sarah. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she accepted the food with trembling hands. "Thank you," she whispered. Daniel looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. "You got someplace to stay?" Sarah hesitated before answering truthfully. "Not anymore. We were in the room above the store, but the new owner told us to leave this morning." Daniel's expression darkened. And where were you planning to sleep tonight? Sarah glanced toward the small church at the end of the street. The minister lets me use the church porch sometimes. Daniel shook his head slowly. That won't do, not with a baby, he thought for a moment. There's a widow woman just outside town, Mrs. Peterson. She takes in boarders occasionally. I know her from way back. He offered his hand. Come on, I'll take you there. Sarah hesitated. I have no money to pay for lodging. Let's worry about that later, Daniel said. First things first. You need to eat, and that baby needs to be somewhere warm tonight. Before Sarah could protest further, Daniel had helped her to her feet and was guiding her toward his horse. With surprising gentleness for a man of his size, he helped her mount, then handed Emma up to her before swinging up behind them. As they rode through town, Sarah felt the stares of the townspeople but kept her eyes fixed straight ahead. Let them talk. She had no choice but to accept this stranger's help for Emma's sake. Been in these parts long? Daniel asked as they left the town behind. 3 years, Sarah replied. Thomas, my husband, he had dreams of building something here. She swallowed hard. What brings you to Copper Creek, Mr. Harding? Daniel, please, he corrected. I'm tracking some men. They've been hitting small towns throughout the territory, robbing stores, banks, killing when it suits them. Sarah stiffened. The men who killed Thomas could be 3 of them. Leader with a scar down his cheek, Sarah nodded, her heart quickening. Yes, the sheriff said he'd send telegrams, but nothing ever came of it. Daniel was quiet for a moment. I'm a bounty hunter, Mrs. Owens. Been on their trail for 2 months now. Sarah, she offered. And it's those men you're after. The ones who killed my husband. Yes, madam, the Blackwater gang. They've left a trail of widows from Montana to here. His arms tightened briefly around her to steady her as the horse navigated a dip in the road. I aim to make sure they don't make any more. The quiet determination in his voice sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. There was something reassuring about his presence, despite the dangerous profession he'd just revealed. Or perhaps because of it. They rode in silence for a while, until a small cabin came into view, smoke rising from its chimney. A neat vegetable garden spread to one side, and chickens pecked in a fenced yard. Mrs. Peterson's place, Daniel announced. Best apple pie in the territory if she's in the mood to bake. As they approached, an elderly woman emerged onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Her white hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and though her face was deeply lined, her eyes were sharp and alert. Daniel Harding, she called. Been a few years, still chasing trouble. Daniel dismounted and helped Sarah down carefully. Evening, Mrs. Peterson. Got a favor to ask. This here is Sarah Owens and her daughter Emma. They need a place to stay. The older woman's keen gaze assessed Sarah and the baby. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her because she nodded briskly. Of course they do. Look half-starved, both of them. She beckoned. Come in, got stew on the stove. Sarah found herself ushered into the warm cabin before she could say a word. The scent of cooking food made her dizzy with hunger, and Emma began to fuss again, sensing her mother's anticipation. Sit, Mrs. Peterson commanded, pointing to a chair at the wooden table. Feed that baby first, then yourself. Sarah flushed. My milk's nearly dried up. I haven't had enough to eat. Mrs. Peterson nodded without judgment. I raised 5 children, girl. I know how it works. I've got goat's milk warming by the fire. Not as good as mother's milk, but it'll do until yours comes back. While the older woman busied herself with preparing a bottle for Emma, Daniel stood awkwardly by the door. I should be getting on, Mrs. Peterson. Got a room at the hotel in town. Nonsense, the widow replied firmly. It's nearly dark. You'll stay for supper at least. Sarah looked up at him, suddenly afraid to see him go. He was a stranger, yes, but the first person to show her kindness in months. Please, she said softly, stay. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise perhaps, or something deeper. He nodded once and removed his hat. "Yes, madam." The meal that followed was the most satisfying Sarah had ever experienced. The stew was simple beef, potatoes, carrots, and onions, but after days of hunger, it tasted like heaven. Emma took to the goat's milk with desperate enthusiasm, and the relief of seeing her daughter's hunger eased brought tears to Sarah's eyes once more. Throughout the meal, Daniel spoke little, but Sarah felt his eyes on her often. Not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but rather as if he was genuinely concerned about her welfare. As Mrs. Peterson cleared the dishes, refusing Sarah's offer to help, Daniel finally asked the question that had clearly been on his mind. "What will you do now?" Sarah smoothed Emma's wispy hair as the baby dozed in her arms, milk drunk and content for the first time in days. "I don't know," she admitted. "I can sew, cook, clean. I help Thomas with the bookkeeping at the store. I'll find work somewhere." "Copper Creek doesn't seem keen on helping one of their own," Daniel observed. Sarah sighed. "Thomas had debts I didn't know about. When he died, people who were owed money. Well, they weren't feeling charitable." Mrs. Peterson returned, wiping her hands on her apron again. "You can stay here as long as you need, Sarah. I've got a spare room upstairs. Been empty since my Martha married and moved to California." Sarah shook her head. "I couldn't impose. It's not imposing if I'm offering," Mrs. Peterson interrupted. "Besides, I could use the help around here. My arthritis makes some chores difficult these days." Daniel nodded approvingly. "Perfect solution." Sarah looked between them, overwhelmed by the sudden turn in her fortune. "I don't know how to thank you both." Mrs. Peterson waved away her gratitude. "Thank me by getting some rest. You look ready to drop." After showing Sarah to a small but clean bedroom upstairs, Mrs. Peterson left her to settle in. Sarah placed Emma in the center of the bed, surrounding her with pillows to prevent her from rolling off, then sat beside her, watching her peaceful sleep. A soft knock at the door startled her. Daniel stood in the doorway, hat in hand. "Just wanted to say goodbye before I head back to town." "You're still leaving?" Sarah asked, unable to keep the disappointment from her voice. "Got a job to finish," he said simply. "Those men need to be brought to justice, for your husband and for others they've hurt." Sarah nodded, understanding. "Of course." Daniel shifted his weight, seeming uncharacteristically unsure of himself. "I'll check in on you before I leave the area. Make sure you're settled." "Thank you," Sarah said, rising from the bed. She moved to stand before him, suddenly aware of how tall he was. "Not just for the food or bringing me here, but for seeing me when no one else would." Daniel's expression softened. "Anyone would have done the same." "But they didn't," Sarah pointed out quietly. "You did." They stood in silence for a moment, the air between them charged with something neither was ready to name. "Good night, Sarah," Daniel finally said, his voice low. "Good night, Daniel," she replied, "and good luck." He nodded once and turned to go, his spurs jingling softly on the wooden floor as he descended the stairs. Sarah returned to the bed, her mind whirling with the day's events. From the depths of despair to a warm bed and a full stomach, and all because a stranger had stopped to help. As she drifted toward sleep, Sarah found herself praying for Daniel's safety as he hunted the men who had destroyed her life. She told herself it was simply gratitude that made her heart race at the thought of seeing him again. In the weeks that followed, Sarah settled into life at Mrs. Peterson's homestead. True to her word, the older woman put her to work tending the garden, helping with the chickens, assisting with canning the autumn harvest. The work was satisfying, and Sarah's strength returned quickly once she was eating regular meals. More importantly, Emma thrived. With proper nutrition, Sarah's milk returned, and the baby grew plump and happy, her laughter a balm to Sarah's wounded heart. "Mrs. Peterson, call me Agnes, dear. Mrs. Peterson makes me look for my mother-in-law proved to be a treasure trove of knowledge about survival on the frontier. She taught Sarah how to identify edible plants, how to preserve food for the winter, and how to shoot the old rifle she kept by the door for unwelcome visitors, two-legged or four." Sarah found herself thinking of Daniel often, wondering where he was if he was safe. Agnes noticed her distraction one afternoon as they worked side by side, peeling apples for preserving. "He'll be back," the older woman said simply. Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I don't know what you mean." Agnes's knowing smile said otherwise. "Daniel Harding is a good man. One of the best. Known him since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. His father worked my husband's ranch before they got their own place over in Johnson County." Sarah tried to appear only politely interested. "You've known him a long time, then?" Agnes nodded, her knife moving deftly to remove an apple peel in one long spiral. "Watched him grow up. Watched him break after what happened to his wife and son, too." Sarah's hands stilled. "His wife died in childbirth 6 years ago. The baby, too." Agnes sighed. "Daniel was never the same after. Started bounty hunting, always on the move, like he's running from the memories." Sarah's heart ached for him. "That's terrible." "Life is hard out here," Agnes said matter-of-factly. "But we go on. You have, haven't you, after losing your Thomas?" Sarah considered the question seriously. "I didn't have a choice. Emma needed me." "Exactly," Agnes said. "That's what Daniel's missing, someone who needs him." She gave Sarah a significant look. "Someone to come home to." Sarah looked down at her half-peeled apple, unsure how to respond. She'd known Daniel Harding for less than a day. The idea that she might be developing feelings for him was absurd, and yet the sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted her thoughts. Agnes moved to the window, peering out. "Well, speak of the devil," she said with a smile. Sarah's heart leapt as she joined Agnes at the window. Sure enough, Daniel was approaching on his chestnut stallion, riding tall and straight in the saddle. But as he drew closer, Sarah gasped. Even from a distance, she could see the bandage wrapped around his left arm, and he was favoring his right side. "He's hurt," she whispered. Already moving toward the door, by the time Daniel dismounted, Sarah was crossing the yard toward him, wiping her hands nervously on her apron. He looked worse up close, a healing cut on his forehead, dark circles under his eyes, several days' worth of beard shadowing his face. "Daniel," she breathed. "What happened?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Hello to you too, Sarah." Despite his attempt at lightness, Sarah could see the pain in his eyes. "Come inside. Agnes will have something for those wounds." Daniel shook his head. "They're mostly healed. Had a doctor look at them in Cheyenne." "Then you'll come inside for coffee at least," Sarah insisted, taking his horse's reins. "You look like you haven't slept in days." Daniel didn't argue, following her toward the house. "How's Emma?" he asked. The simple question, asked with genuine concern, warmed Sarah's heart. "Thriving. Growing so fast. She's napping now, but you'll see her when she wakes." In the kitchen, Agnes took one look at Daniel and began fussing, insisting he sit while she prepared food. Sarah brought him coffee, watching with concern as he winced when settling into the chair. "What happened?" she asked again, more gently this time. Daniel sipped the hot coffee before answering. "Found them, the Blackwater gang." His eyes met hers. "They won't hurt anyone else." Sarah's heart pounded. "All of them, all 3, he confirmed. 2 are in jail in Cheyenne awaiting trial. The leader, the one with the scar, he didn't give me a choice." The grim set of his mouth told the rest of the story. "I'm sorry you were hurt," Sarah said softly. Daniel shrugged, then winced at the movement. "Occupational hazard." Agnes placed a plate of bread and cold chicken before him. "Eat," she commanded. "Then rest. You look like you've been rode hard and put away wet." Daniel smiled tiredly. "Yes, madam." As he ate, Sarah noticed how his gaze kept finding her, as if reassuring himself she was really there. It made something flutter in her chest, a feeling she hadn't experienced since Thomas's early courtship days. "I brought something for you," Daniel said when he'd finished eating. He reached into his coat pocket with his good arm and withdrew a small leather pouch. "It's not much, but—" He placed it on the table between them. Sarah looked at him questioningly before opening it. Inside was money more than she'd seen in months. "Daniel, I can't— It's not charity," he interrupted firmly. "It's what was owed to your husband. The gang had cash on them stolen money." The marshal agreed some should go to the victims' families. His eyes held hers. "It's yours by right, Sarah." Sarah stared at the money, emotions warring within her. It wouldn't bring Thomas back, but it would give her and Emma a chance at a new start. "Thank you," she finally whispered. Agnes, who had been watching the exchange with interest, announced, "Daniel, you're staying the night. The small room at the end of the hall is made up. No arguments." After Agnes went upstairs to check on Emma, Sarah and Daniel sat in comfortable silence. Finally, Sarah gathered her courage to ask the question foremost in her mind. "What will you do now? Go after more bounties?" Daniel studied his coffee cup. "I've been thinking about that. Been on the trail a long time now." He glanced up. "Thought I might stay in these parts for a while. There's a small ranch for sale just over the ridge. Nothing fancy, but good grazing land." Hope bloomed in Sarah's chest. "You'd settle here, in Copper Creek?" "Near enough," he said, "if I had a reason to stay." The air between them charged again with unspoken possibilities. Sarah found herself unable to look away from his steady gaze. The sound of Emma's cries broke the moment. Sarah rose quickly. "That's Emma. I should go to her." Daniel nodded, but as she passed his chair, he gently caught her hand. "Bring her down. I'd like to see her." Sarah smiled. "Of course." When she returned with Emma, freshly changed and alert, Daniel's face transformed. Gone was the hard-edged bounty hunter, replaced by a man whose eyes softened at the sight of a baby's smile. "She's beautiful," he said as Sarah placed Emma in his arms. "Looks like you." Sarah watched as Emma immediately grabbed for Daniel's beard, making him laugh despite what must have been considerable pain from his injuries. "She likes you," Sarah observed. "Smart girl," he replied with a wink that made Sarah blush. That evening established a pattern. Daniel stayed not just one night but several, claiming his injuries needed more time to heal. Agnes didn't challenge the obvious excuse, and Sarah found herself hoping each day that he would find another reason to delay his departure. They fell into an easy routine. Daniel helped with the heavier chores around the homestead, chopping wood and mending fences. Sarah cared for Emma and assisted Agnes with household tasks. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes comfortable in shared silence. One crisp October afternoon, Daniel suggested a ride to show Sarah the ranch he was considering purchasing. Agnes immediately offered to watch Emma, practically pushing them out the door with a knowing smile. The ranch was modest but well situated, with a small cabin, a barn, and acres of good grazing land. As they stood on a ridge overlooking the property, Sarah could see why it appealed to Daniel. Mountains rose in the distance, and a creek ran along one edge of the land. "What do you think?" Daniel asked, watching her reaction carefully. "It's beautiful," Sarah replied honestly. "Peaceful," Daniel nodded. "Been thinking I might raise horses, always had a way with them." "It suits you," Sarah said. "A place of your own." Daniel turned to face her fully. "Sarah, there's something I need to say." Her heart quickened at his serious tone. "Yes, I know it hasn't been long since you lost your husband, and maybe what I'm feeling is too soon." He removed his hat, running a hand through his hair nervously. "But I can't stop thinking about you. About Emma, too. About what it might be like to build something here together." Sarah's breath caught. "Daniel, I'm not asking for promises," he hurried on. "Just a chance to see if there might be something between us worth pursuing." Sarah looked out over the land that could be his, that could be theirs, and thought about the past few weeks. How natural it had felt to have him in their lives. How Emma's face lit up when he entered a room. How her own heart seemed lighter in his presence. "When I first met you," she said slowly, "I had nothing. No food, no shelter, no hope." She turned to meet his anxious gaze. "You changed that in an instant. Then both will eat tonight," you said. Such a simple thing, but it meant everything. Daniel took a step closer. "I'd like to take care of you both if you'll let me. Not because you need it, but because I want to." Sarah smiled, reaching up to touch his cheek. "I think I'd like that very much." The kiss that followed was gentle, tentative, a promise of possibilities rather than passion. When they parted, Daniel rested his forehead against hers, his hands cradling her face as if she were something precious. "We'll take it slow," he promised. "Get to know each other properly." Sarah nodded, her heart full. "I'd like that." Winter came to Wyoming territory, harsh and unforgiving, but Sarah hardly noticed the bitter cold. The small homestead was warm with companionship and growing affection. Daniel officially purchased the ranch, but spent most evenings at Agnes's cabin, slowly courting Sarah with a patience that touched her deeply. He brought small gifts when he could, a ribbon for Emma's hair, a book of poetry for Sarah, sweets from the general store in town. But more valuable were the gifts of his time and attention. The way he listened when Sarah spoke of Thomas, offering understanding without jealousy. The hours he spent with Emma, bouncing her on his knee or reading to her from the newspaper. By Christmas, Sarah knew she was falling in love. The realization didn't come with guilt or confusion, as she'd feared it might. Instead, it felt like the natural progression of her healing, a new chapter rather than a betrayal of what came before. Agnes watched their courtship with undisguised approval, often finding excuses to leave them alone together. "My old bones need rest," she would announce, though her eyes twinkled with mischief as she took Emma upstairs, leaving Sarah and Daniel by the fire. On Christmas Eve, after Emma had been tucked in bed and Agnes had retired for the night, Daniel presented Sarah with a small wooden box. "It's not much," he said, uncharacteristically nervous. Inside was a silver locket, simple but beautiful. When Sarah opened it, she found a tiny lock of Emma's hair on one side. "The other side is empty," Daniel explained. "I thought, maybe someday it might hold something else, a memory we create together, perhaps." Sarah closed her hand around the locket, deeply moved by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "It's perfect," she whispered. Daniel took her hand. "Sarah, I know we agreed to take things slow, but I need to ask." He drew a deep breath. "Would you consider becoming my wife?" "Not right away if you're not ready. But someday." Sarah didn't hesitate. The answer had been forming in her heart for weeks. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I would." The joy that transformed Daniel's face was answer enough to any doubt she might have harbored. He gathered her in his arms, his kiss deeper and more passionate than any they had shared before. "I love you," he murmured against her lips. "You and Emma both." "And we love you," Sarah replied, realizing the truth of it as she spoke the words. They were married in the spring, when wildflowers dotted the prairie and new life emerged from winter's grip. The ceremony was small, just Agnes, the minister, and a few of Daniel's friends from his bounty hunting days who had cleaned up impressively for the occasion. Emma, now a year old and taking her first wobbly steps, was passed from arms to arms, doted on by everyone present. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, She clapped her hands as if understanding the significance of the moment. Their new life on the ranch began with hope and hard work. Daniel proved to have a natural talent for horse breeding, and within 2 years, their modest operation had gained a reputation for quality stock. Sarah kept the books, managed the household, and cared for Emma, finding fulfillment in creating a home filled with love. Agnes remained in her cabin but was a frequent visitor, becoming the grandmother Emma had never had. She watched with satisfaction as the love between Daniel and Sarah deepened with each passing season. 3 years after they met, Sarah gave birth to a son they named Thomas Daniel, honoring both the past and the present. Daniel wept when he first held his son, the grief of his previous loss finally finding healing in new joy. As Sarah watched her husband rock their newborn, with Emma now 4 and fiercely protective of her baby brother pressed against his side, she remembered that desperate day in Copper Creek. How close she had come to losing everything, how a single act of kindness had changed the course of her life. "What are you thinking about?" Daniel asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. Sarah smiled, crossing the room to join her family. "I was thinking about fate. How sometimes the worst day of your life can lead to the best." Daniel understood immediately. "That day in town," he said softly. "Yes," Sarah confirmed. "When I was at my lowest and you said those words that changed everything." Daniel reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "Then both will eat tonight," he recalled. "And now look at us," Sarah said, gesturing to their children, their home, the life they'd built together. "So much more than I could have dreamed." "This is just the beginning," Daniel promised, drawing her close for a kiss that still made her heart race after all their time together. Outside, the Wyoming sun set over their ranch, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Inside, the family Daniel and Sarah had created, born of loss, nurtured by kindness, and sustained by love, gathered close, safe in the knowledge that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. For Sarah Owens Harding, who had once known the bitter taste of despair, life had never been sweeter. The woman who had been left to starve had found not just sustenance but abundance in love, in family, and in the promise of all the days to come.